The Winter Moon Festival transformed the capital into a sea of silver lanterns. Music echoed through the streets. Children laughed as they chased glowing paper wolves. The scent of roasted chestnuts and sweet pastries drifted through the crisp evening air. For the first time in 6 months, Elena Hart allowed herself to believe she was safe. She pulled her wool cloak tighter and smiled at a little girl dancing beneath the lanterns. This was what freedom was supposed to feel like. Quiet, ordinary, hopeful. Then she saw him, Victor Hale, her former fiancé. He stood at the far end of the crowded square, scanning every face with growing desperation. The moment his eyes found hers, they lit with triumph. "There you are!" he shouted. People stepped aside as Victor forced his way through the crowd. Elena's heart pounded. 6 months ago, she had exposed him for forging her late father's signature to steal the Hart family estate. She had believed justice would prevail. Instead, Victor bribed witnesses, escaped conviction, and swore she would regret humiliating him. Since then, she had lived in hiding. Now he had found her. "There is nowhere left to run," Victor called. Panic swallowed every sensible thought. Elena turned in every direction. The streets were packed. Every escape was blocked. Then she noticed a tall man standing alone near the fountain, with his back to the crowd. He wore a dark coat without any royal insignia. He looked like an ordinary traveler, enjoying the festival in silence. It was a reckless idea, but it was the only one she had. She hurried toward him. When she reached him, her voice was barely more than a whisper. "Please, just pretend you're my boyfriend." Before fear could stop her, she wrapped her arms around him. Then she kissed him. It wasn't graceful. It wasn't romantic. It was desperate. For one long moment, the stranger didn't move. Then Elena felt his hand rest lightly against her back. Not possessively, but steadily, as though reassuring her she would not fall. She finally pulled away. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. The music stopped. Every conversation in the square faded into silence. Confused, Elena looked around. Dozens of royal guards were rushing toward them. Not toward Victor, toward the man she had just kissed. One after another, the guards knelt. Nearby, alphas lowered their heads without hesitation. Festival performers froze in place. Even Victor stopped running, his face slowly drained of color. Elena turned back to the stranger. For the first time, she truly looked at him. Silver eyes, calm expression, a quiet authority that seemed impossible to ignore. He met her gaze with surprising amusement instead of anger. Around them, terrified whispers spread through the silent crowd. "She doesn't know. How could she?" "Oh, moon goddess." Someone finally spoke the words everyone else was afraid to say. "She just kissed the AlphaKing." Elena felt the world tilt beneath her feet. The stranger she had chosen at random was the most feared ruler in the kingdom. Elena could not move. The words echoed through her mind. The AlphaKing. She had kissed the AlphaKing. Her face burned with embarrassment as she quickly stepped back. I'm so sorry, Your Majesty. It was a mistake. I didn't know." The man studied her for a long moment. His silver eyes held no anger, only quiet curiosity. "You certainly didn't." His voice was calm, almost amused. Before Elena could apologize again, Victor finally reached them. "There you are," he shouted. Then he noticed the royal guards kneeling. His confidence vanished. Slowly, he lifted his eyes toward the man standing beside Elena. Recognition struck him like lightning. Your Majesty." Victor immediately dropped to his knees. His entire body trembled. Cale Draven, the Iron Wolf, looked at him without expression. "Who are you?" Victor swallowed hard. "Victor Hale." I was only speaking with my fiancé." Elena's stomach tightened. "No," she said firmly. "I ended our engagement months ago." Victor ignored her. She's confused. She belongs with me. Kale's gaze shifted briefly toward Elena. She expected him to step away, to expose her desperate lie. Instead, he asked one simple question. Miss Hart. She looked up. Is this man disturbing you? Elena hesitated only a heartbeat. Yes. Kale nodded once. Then he looked back at Victor. His voice remained perfectly calm. Then, you are disturbing my fiancé. The square fell silent again. Elena stared at him in disbelief. Fiancé? Victor looked as though the ground had disappeared beneath him. Your fiancé? Kale slipped one arm gently around Elena's waist. The gesture was respectful, yet unmistakable. You heard me. Victor's lips trembled. I didn't know she belonged to you. Kale's expression never changed. Now you do. Victor lowered his head until it nearly touched the ground. I beg your forgiveness, Your Majesty. I never intended any disrespect. Kale's voice grew colder. You intended to frighten a woman who clearly wanted nothing to do with you. Victor said nothing. There will be consequences if you approach her again. Do you understand? Yes, Your Majesty. Without another word, Victor backed away through the crowd. He never once looked at Elena again. Only when he had completely disappeared did Kale remove his arm. The tension in the square slowly faded. The guards stood. Musicians cautiously resumed playing. Conversations returned in nervous whispers. Elena released the breath she had been holding. You didn't have to do that, she said softly. No, Kale replied. I chose to. She searched his face. Why? He glanced toward the festival around them. Because fear is easy to recognize. I've seen enough of it to know when it's real. He offered her his arm. Allow my guards to escort you home. I don't want to cause you more trouble. You won't. She hesitated before accepting. As they walked through the festival, the crowd parted without being asked. No one dared stand in the AlphaKing's path. When they reached the quiet street outside Elena's boarding house, she turned to him. I owe you an apology. Kale gave a faint smile. I think we've had enough apologies for one evening. She couldn't help smiling back. He started to leave, then paused. There is one thing I would ask. What is it? Come to the palace tomorrow morning. She blinked. Why? Kale looked at her with the same calm expression he had worn since the moment she kissed him. Because unfinished conversations deserve daylight. Then the AlphaKing walked away, leaving Elena wondering why the most feared man in the kingdom had treated a complete stranger with such unexpected kindness. Elena barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the moment she had kissed a complete stranger. Then she remembered he was not a stranger at all. He was AlphaKing Kale Draven. By sunrise, she had convinced herself there was only one honorable thing to do. She would apologize properly. The palace gates opened the moment she gave her name. Instead of suspicion, the guards greeted her with quiet respect. One servant led her through grand halls lined with marble pillars and towering windows. Elena had never seen such luxury, yet she found herself thinking of the modest home her father had loved far more than polished stone. Kale was waiting in a sunlit study. He stood beside an open window, reading a stack of reports. When she entered, he set them aside. You came. I said I would. She folded her hands tightly. Your Majesty, I'm deeply sorry for what happened at the festival. I placed you in an impossible position. I embarrassed you before the entire kingdom. To her surprise, Kale shook his head. You did none of those things. She stared at him. I didn't? No. He motioned toward a chair. Please. Once they were seated, he spoke calmly. For the past 3 years, every noble family has tried to arrange a marriage with me. Elena listened quietly. They praised my title, my lands, my crown. They admired everything I owned, but none of them knew who I was. He looked directly at her. You were the first woman to kiss me. without knowing I was king. Heat rushed to Elena's cheeks. I assure you, that wasn't exactly planned. A rare smile touched Kale's face. I know. And that's precisely why it mattered. Silence settled between them. Then Kale opened a small wooden chest resting on his desk. Inside lay glittering necklaces, bracelets, and several heavy bags of gold coins. I involved you in a public deception. I would like you to accept these. Elena looked at the fortune. It was enough to buy several estates. She quietly closed the lid. I can't. Kale raised an eyebrow. You don't have to refuse out of politeness. I'm not. She met his gaze steadily. If I accept payment for surviving yesterday, I'll spend the rest of my life feeling like someone purchased my dignity. Kale remained silent. She continued. My father taught me something before he died. He said losing money can be recovered. Losing your self-respect is much harder. She smiled faintly. I don't need jewels. I don't need gold. I just need the chance to build another life. The room grew very still. Kale had negotiated treaties, commanded armies, judged powerful nobles, yet few words had impressed him as much as those. Most people asked a king for favors. This woman asked only for the opportunity to stand on her own feet. You truly expect nothing from me? He asked. I expect one thing. What? That you continue protecting people who cannot protect themselves. Kale nodded slowly. I intend to. Elena rose from her chair. Then I should go. She bowed respectfully before leaving the study. Kale watched the door close behind her. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he turned to the captain of his royal investigators, who had been waiting outside. Reopen Victor Hale's financial case. The captain frowned. The court's already dismissed it. I know. Kale's silver eyes hardened. This time, I want every transaction, every witness, and every lie uncovered. Something told him Elena's story had never been just about a stolen estate. 3 days after reopening Victor Hale's case, the first reports arrived on King Kale's desk. None of them mentioned stolen land. They mentioned missing maps, hidden payments, and men who had disappeared after visiting the Hart estate. Kale read every page himself. The deeper his investigators searched, the stranger the story became. Victor had spent far more money bribing laborers than the Hart estate was worth. He had hired miners, stonemasons, even demolition crews. It made no sense. Unless he had never wanted the estate. He had wanted something beneath it. By sunset, Kale rode with a company of royal investigators to the abandoned property. The once beautiful home stood empty. Broken windows reflected the fading light. Weeds swallowed the gardens Elena's father had lovingly planted. Kale walked through the silent house. Dust covered every room. Yet one section of the cellar looked strangely untouched. A loose stone caught the attention of the lead investigator. After several minutes of clearing debris, they uncovered a hidden iron door. It had remained sealed for generations. When they forced it open, cold air rushed through the tunnel beyond. Torches flickered as the investigators descended. The passage led to an underground chamber carved from solid stone. At its center stood an ancient royal vault. The crest of the first AlphaKings was still visible on its weathered doors. Inside were rows of locked chests. Most contained faded ledgers, military records, official seals, documents forgotten by history. One investigator carefully opened a leather-bound journal. His expression changed instantly. Your Majesty, you need to see this. Kale stepped forward. The records listed shipments of weapons, but they had never reached the royal army. Instead, they had been secretly sold to enemy packs for nearly 30 years. Every shipment carried the approval of respected noble families. Some names belonged to members of Kale's own royal council. The betrayal reached into the highest levels of the kingdom. Another investigator found a ledger of payments. Victor Hale's name appeared repeatedly. He wasn't stealing an estate. the captain said quietly. He was hired to recover these records before anyone else found them. Kale closed the journal, so Elena never became his target because of money. The captain nodded. She inherited the property. That made her the only surviving person connected to this vault. Kale's jaw tightened. Without realizing it, she became the final witness. As they sealed the evidence, another guard hurried into the chamber. "Your Majesty, we caught someone watching the estate." The prisoner was dragged forward. His cloak concealed the insignia of one of the kingdom's oldest noble houses. A poisoned dagger fell from his sleeve. He refused to speak. He didn't need to. Kale already understood why he had come. Not to steal, to kill anyone who discovered the vault. Back at the palace, Kale stood alone in his study, long after midnight. He looked toward the city lights beyond the window. Elena believed she had escaped one dangerous man. She had no idea that far more powerful enemies now knew her name. She was no longer simply a woman running from an abusive ex. She had become the kingdom's most important witness, and somewhere in the darkness, people powerful enough to betray the crown had already begun hunting her. Before dawn, the palace alarms shattered the silence. A horn echoed across the royal grounds. Guards rushed through the corridors with swords drawn. "Protect the king! Seal every entrance!" Elena woke to the sound of pounding footsteps outside the guest chamber, where Kale had insisted she stay until Victor's investigation was complete. Before she could reach the door, it burst open. Captain Rowan, commander of the Royal Guard, stepped inside. "Your Majesty ordered me to bring you to the secure wing." "What happened?" Elena asked. "We're under attack." Her blood ran cold. The captain led her through hidden passages beneath the palace. Behind them came the clash of steel and the distant howls of wolves. Someone was trying to force their way inside. When they finally reached the underground sanctuary, Kale was already waiting. A thin cut marked his cheek. "It wasn't Victor," Elena whispered. Kale shook his head. "No, they came for you." The words settled heavily between them. Hours later, the attack had been repelled. Several assassins had been captured. None survived questioning. Each carried poison hidden in a hollow tooth, choosing death over revealing who had hired them. By midday, the royal council gathered in the throne room. Their expressions were grim. An elderly counselor stepped forward. "Your Majesty, Miss Hart must leave the capital." Elena looked up in surprise. The assassins followed her here. If she remains, the palace will continue to be targeted. Another council member nodded. "Send her into exile, under a new identity. It is the safest course." Elena lowered her eyes. She hated the thought. But perhaps they were right. If her presence endangered innocent lives, she quietly spoke. "I'll leave." Kale looked at her. "No." The room fell silent. The counselor frowned. "Your Majesty." Kale rose from the throne. His voice remained calm, but it carried through every corner of the chamber. "Exile tells our enemies we are afraid. It tells them they can dictate who belongs in this kingdom." He descended the steps until he stood beside Elena. "They have already tried to kill her. I'm not sending her away to face them alone." The council exchanged uneasy glances. "Then what do you propose?" one asked. Kale answered without hesitation. "I will announce my engagement to Elena Hart." Gasps filled the room. Even Elena stared at him in disbelief. The council erupted into protest. "Your Majesty, that's impossible. She's not of noble birth. The kingdom will question your judgment." Kale waited until the voices faded. Then he spoke. "The woman standing beside me refused my wealth. She refused my title. She asked only for the chance to live honestly." He looked directly at the council. "If that is not the character worthy of a queen, then this kingdom has misunderstood nobility." Silence followed. No one dared argue further. That afternoon, royal messengers spread across the capital. Before sunset, every bell in the city rang. Crowds gathered in the palace square as the High Chancellor stepped onto the balcony. His announcement echoed through the streets. By decree of His Majesty AlphaKing Kale Draven, an engagement has been declared. The future queen of the kingdom shall be Miss Elena Hart. Shock rippled through the crowd. Inside the palace, Elena stood beside Kale, still struggling to believe what had happened. "You've changed everything," she whispered. Kale met her gaze. "No. I've simply made one thing clear. If anyone wishes to harm you again, they'll have to come through me first." For the first time in years, the Iron Wolf placed one ordinary woman's safety above politics, reputation, and even his own throne. The kingdom buzzed with speculation after the royal engagement. Some believed Elena had bewitched the AlphaKing. Others insisted she had been secretly born into nobility. Elena ignored the rumors. She knew the truth. She was simply a woman whose life had changed because of one desperate kiss. A week later, Captain Rowan entered the palace library, carrying a weathered wooden box. "We found this beneath the floorboards of your father's study," he said. "It was hidden inside the old vault." Elena stared at the box. She recognized the carved wolf on its lid. Her father had made it himself. With trembling hands, she opened it. Inside lay only a faded leather journal and a sealed letter. Across the front, in her father's familiar handwriting, were the words, "To the future AlphaKing." Elena looked at Kale. "I've never seen this before." He nodded gently. "Read it." She carefully broke the wax seal. The ink had faded with time, but every word remained clear. "To the man who will one day wear the moon crown. If this letter reaches you, it means I am no longer here. Many years ago, during the border war, I had the honor of fighting beside a young soldier who valued every life entrusted to him." Kale's breathing slowed. His eyes never left the page. "He never told me his name. He only thanked me after I pulled him from beneath a burning watchtower." A memory flashed through Kale's mind. Smoke, falling timber, a soldier dragging him to safety, while enemy arrows rained from the sky. He had searched for that man for years. He had never found him. Elena continued reading. "If that young soldier truly becomes king, I ask only one thing. Should my daughter ever stand before you, judge her by her character, never by the enemies who surround her." Silence filled the library. Elena lowered the letter. Tears blurred her vision. "My father never told me." Kale accepted the letter with careful hands. His voice was barely above a whisper. "He saved my life. He refused every reward. I never even learned his name." Elena smiled sadly. "That sounds like him. He always believed kindness wasn't something you should be paid for." Kale folded the letter with great care. "I spent years trying to repay a debt to a man I could never find." He looked at Elena. "Without realizing it, I've been keeping the promise he asked of me." She reached for the journal, still resting inside the box. Between its pages was a pressed wildflower, the same kind her father used to bring home after long days in the fields. She closed the book gently. "He wanted me to grow up in a kingdom where truth mattered." Kale stepped beside her. "And that's the kingdom we'll build. Not because of a promise between kings, not because of an old debt, but because it was right." Elena slipped the letter back into its envelope. For the first time since losing her father, the ache in her heart felt a little lighter. His voice had reached across the years. His courage had protected not only a young soldier on a battlefield, but his daughter as well. Kale looked toward the palace window, where the evening sun bathed the kingdom in gold. He had finally discovered the identity of the man who had once saved his life. And he silently vowed that, for the rest of his reign, he would honor that sacrifice by ensuring no truth could ever again be buried beneath fear or corruption. 3 months later, the great hall of judgment was filled from wall to wall. Nobles, military commanders, village elders, ordinary citizens, For the first time in generations, a treason trial would be witnessed by the entire kingdom. Victor Hale stood in chains. The confidence that had once defined him had disappeared. Beside him stood the council members, who had secretly sold weapons to enemy packs for decades. The evidence was overwhelming. The ledgers recovered from the royal vault, the hidden payments, the testimony of surviving witnesses. One by one, every lie unraveled. When the final verdict was read, the hall remained silent. Victor and the conspirators were stripped of their titles, fortunes, and every privilege they had abused. Their estates were seized by the crown, but Cale's next decree surprised the kingdom. The confiscated wealth, he announced, will not remain in the royal treasury. It will be returned to the families who suffered because of this conspiracy. Farmers who had lost their land received new deeds. Widows whose husbands had died because of stolen weapons were compensated. Children orphaned by the betrayal were granted lifelong education, homes, and support from the crown. Elena watched the faces in the crowd. Some cried openly. Others simply bowed their heads in gratitude. Justice, at last, had become more than a promise. That evening, Cale asked Elena to accompany him somewhere. They traveled without ceremony, without guards surrounding every step. Only a few trusted protectors remained at a respectful distance. Their destination made Elena smile the moment she recognized it. The Winter Moon Festival. Silver lanterns once again floated above the streets. Music drifted through the crisp evening air. Children laughed exactly as they had months before. Cale guided her to the old stone fountain at the center of the square. They stopped in the very place where everything had begun. "For months," he said with a quiet smile, "I've wondered something." Elena folded her arms playfully. "What is it?" He looked at her with warm amusement. "If you had known who I was that night, would you still have kissed me?" She pretended to think very carefully. I don't believe so." Cale laughed. "So the AlphaKing would have been rejected?" "Oh, absolutely." She grinned. "I probably would have run in the opposite direction." His laughter grew louder than anyone around them had ever heard. People passing by glanced toward the king in surprise. The feared Iron Wolf was laughing like an ordinary man. When the laughter faded, Cale gently took Elena's hands. "I'm grateful you didn't know." "So am I," she admitted. "If I'd seen a crown, I never would have seen the man." A comfortable silence settled between them. The festival lights reflected in Elena's eyes. Cale brushed a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "The first kiss happened because you were afraid." She nodded. "This one doesn't have to." Elena rose onto her toes. This time, there was no panic, no desperate escape, no lies. She kissed him because she knew exactly who he was. A strong king, an honest man, and the person she had chosen to spend her life beside. When they finally pulled apart, Cale rested his forehead against hers. "What began as an accident," he whispered, "became the greatest blessing of my life." Above them, silver lanterns drifted into the night sky. The same festival that had witnessed one frightened mistake, now witnessed a promise that would last forever. 1 year after their wedding, the kingdom had changed in ways few believed possible. King Cale was still known as the Iron Wolf. Corrupt officials still feared the sound of his footsteps. Criminals still understood that justice would be swift. But the people had begun calling him by another name, the Guardian King. The title had not been declared by the royal council. It had spread from village to village, carried by ordinary voices. Because while Cale remained unyielding against corruption, he had become something he had never expected: accessible. Every month, he and Queen Elena held public hearings in the palace courtyard. Anyone could attend. A shepherd with a boundary dispute, a widow seeking justice, a merchant accusing a tax collector of theft. No title was required. No bribe opened the gates. Every person received the same opportunity to speak. The idea had been Elena's. The crown should never be hidden behind walls, she had told Kale. It should be where people can reach it. At first, the nobles complained. It is beneath a king to hear common disputes. Kale answered with only one sentence. It is beneath a king to ignore them. The complaints ended. One afternoon, an elderly farmer approached the royal table, carrying a worn sack of grain. My harvest failed, he admitted. I cannot pay my taxes this season. Years earlier, Kale might have ordered the law enforced without exception. Instead, he asked a different question. What caused the harvest to fail? Drought, Your Majesty. Elena quietly requested reports from neighboring villages. She soon discovered that dozens of farmers had suffered the same losses. It was not neglect, it was misfortune. Together, she and Kale created an emergency grain reserve to support struggling communities during difficult seasons. The policy saved countless families from hunger. As the months passed, similar reforms followed. Schools opened in villages that had never had teachers. Orphans received homes funded by the estates confiscated from traders. Veterans injured in service were guaranteed lifelong care. People noticed something remarkable. Elena had not softened Kale's strength. She had given it direction. One evening, after another long day of hearing petitions, the royal couple walked through the palace gardens. You've changed, Elena said with a smile. Kale glanced at her. Is that a compliment? She laughed. It is. You still frighten dishonest people. But honest people aren't afraid to speak to you anymore. Kale looked across the gardens, where children of palace staff played beneath blooming trees. I used to think ruling meant making people obey. And now? Now I think it means giving them reasons to trust. Elena slipped her hand into his. My father would have liked that answer. Kale smiled. I hope so. Across the kingdom, people found a new name for Elena as well. Not because she had married a king, not because she wore a crown, but because she believed no mistake should define a person's future. They called her the Queen of Second Chances. Together, the Guardian King and the Queen of Second Chances proved that a kingdom did not become stronger through fear alone. It became stronger when justice walked hand in hand with mercy. Many years passed. Children who had once watched the royal wedding grew into parents of their own. The kingdom prospered under the reign of King Kale and Queen Elena. Corruption became rare. Justice could not be bought. No citizen feared speaking the truth because of wealth or power. Yet every winter, one celebration remained more beloved than any other. The Winter Moon Festival. The streets of the capital glowed beneath thousands of silver lanterns, just as they had on the night everything changed. But there was one tradition that had never existed before Elena became queen. It was called the Festival of Second Chances. At sunset, couples gathered around the old stone fountain, where Elena had once kissed a stranger in desperation. Some had survived misunderstandings. Others had overcome loss, distance, or heartbreak. They came not to celebrate perfect beginnings, but unexpected ones. As always, Queen Elena addressed the crowd. Though her hair now carried a touch of silver, her smile was as warm as ever. She looked at the young faces before her and said, "The happiest moments of your life may begin with panic, because destiny doesn't always knock politely." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Many had heard the story countless times. They never grew tired of it. King Kale stepped beside her. Age had softened neither his posture nor the quiet strength in his silver eyes. He carried a polished stone plaque covered with a silk cloth. With one smooth motion, he unveiled it before the entrance to the royal hall. Carved into the stone were the words, "Strength can protect a kingdom, but kindness is what gives it something worth protecting." The crowd stood in respectful silence. Those words became more than an inscription. They became the heart of the kingdom. A little girl tugged gently on Elena's sleeve. "Your Majesty?" Elena knelt beside her. "Yes?" Is it true you kissed the king by accident? Kale chuckled before Elena could answer. Entirely by accident. The girl frowned thoughtfully. And then you married him anyway? Elena laughed. I did. The little girl smiled. That's my favorite kind of story. So is mine, Kale admitted. As evening settled over the city, music filled the square once more. Young couples danced beneath the lanterns. Children chased glowing paper wolves through the streets. Families shared warm bread and sweet cakes. Peace had become so ordinary that many no longer remembered how hard it had been won. But the older generation remembered. They remembered the frightened young woman who had wrapped her arms around a stranger, simply to escape a man who refused to let her go. They remembered the ruthless AlphaKing who could have stepped away, but chose to protect her instead. That desperate kiss had lasted only a few seconds. Its consequences had transformed an entire kingdom. And long after King Kale and Queen Elena were gone, people continued telling their story beneath the silver lanterns every winter. Not because it began perfectly, but because it proved that sometimes the greatest love stories begin with a mistake and become unforgettable because two people choose kindness over fear, truth over comfort, and each other over everything else.